Hello again. This is a discussion on Chapter 5, Political Parties. Now, you would think that, or one could think that political parties are at the heart of political science. However, they're not. Uh, you know, I think lawmaking and the lawmaking process is probably at the heart of political science. And there's a lot of other aspects to political science: methodology, public administration, international politics, and so on. But I guess the role that political parties play is one of a avenue by which persons take office and then can make law. So I think of political parties as more of a communication device by the public, and for purposes of getting law made. During the presidential primaries that are going on now, and then as we get into the summer and late summer and fall, when President Obama runs against uh, Mitt Romney, you're going to see a lot of talk about red states and blue states and independents. You'll hear a discussion about NASCAR voters, soccer moms, yuppies, Catholic vote, party identification. You hear things about independent voters, swing states, and so on. What does all this mean? Well, these are terms that describe uh, the likelihood of voting taking place for one candidate or another. So when we talk about soccer moms, that terminology suggests just what it is. A mother who is in her minivan driving the kids around, and she's trying to make ends meet, do 50 things at once, keep the car running. Sometimes she's a single head of household. She may be limitedly educated and maybe have a job or a part-time job. Maybe have a whole family with a husband at home, with a husband as well. But these are people that are deeply involved in the school system, athletics, local community events, the book club, cake baking, and so on and so on. And are they going to vote the same way as the NASCAR male voter? Probably not. You know, when you think about someone, NASCAR brings to mind somebody chewing tobacco, drinking beer, which is good. I mean, it has its positives. Sitting outside of Bristol Speedway in an RV, has a motorcycle next to that, wearing a jeans jacket, a funny hat, and telling humorless bad jokes, and maybe not having a full-time job, or maybe being retired. Is that person's politics going to be the same as the soccer mom? No. And so it's up to political parties to provide the avenue for you and I, for everyone, to understand what the differences are between and among the candidates. And so the book talks about, the text, chapter 5, talks about something called the responsible party model. The responsible party model is a collection of variables that suggests that political parties are important to the political process. Now, I want you to go through that responsible party model, and it suggests to us that here are some of the things, some of the variables that parties are supposed to do. They clarify alternative policy choices. They educate us about issues, recruit candidates, organize direct campaigns, and so on and so on. A number of things that the responsible party model attends to. However, in reality, most of the parties that we think about, the Democrats, the Republicans, and yes, there's more, the Communist Party, the Green Party, the Animals Rights Party, what's the one, Libertarian Party with Ron Paul. You know, these parties are not exactly as responsible as you would want to be told they are. The what I call not so responsible party model, parties often do not clarify what they stand for. They also sometimes lean to the middle and try to get the voters in the middle rather than standing on ideology that goes to the very right or to the very left. Um, Candidates today don't rely on parties as they once did to help develop their image or package their policy-making stand They depend on themselves. They put out their own commercials. And candidates, once they become elected officials, the political parties basically can't hold their feet to the fire to do what they promised they would do. Political promises being what they are, do what they would do what they said they were going to do back when they were running for office. So the responsible party model that you'll read in the book is not as uh, firm today as it once was maybe 100 years ago. But on that note, are parties still responsible and important? Yes. As candidate-centered parties, they are important in the primaries. They bring registered voter people to the registration booth to register for voting. Candidates, although they have become more important, they themselves, their personality and their persona, they still rely on parties for volunteers to get out the vote, to get out the word. Mass media tends to drive our perceptions about candidates, but at the local level and state level especially, you'll find that having a party tag of a Democrat, Republican, or Libertarian still means something. So parties do survive. Look at that section in the book and be very aware of how parties operate. Generally, and usually, in order to run for office, people run in a primary for both the Democratic primary and the Republican primary. And the real purpose of a primary is to narrow the field of candidates so that we only have one in the Democratic Party and one in the Republican Party. But before that general election, the primary election might have 10 or 15 people in the Democratic primary and 10 or 15 people running for the Republican primary. Let's say for the field of state treasurer. So, I'm going to have an opening in a state treasurer this coming election for the state of Tennessee, let's say. Might have 10 people in Democrats, 10 people running for the Republican. There'll be a primary election. And most states will take the person who wins a majority vote. However, if there's no majority vote, then we run into something called a runoff primary of the top two. So out of 10, let's say the top person gets 30%, which is likely. You have 10 people running, you're going to split the vote pretty well. So top person gets 30, maybe the second behind that person gets 25. We'll take those two top people, the 30 and 25, run them again, and see who gets more than 50%. And it's never going to be exactly the same, 5,427 votes each. Somebody's going to get a majority. There are different kinds of primaries. Take a look at the text about that, and please know the difference between a closed, open, blank, and semi-closed primary. The text talks about realignment and de-alignment. It's a simple idea, but I want you to read up on this. Realignment, if you think of it this way, is where people who are in one party, let's say the Democratic Party, are shifting for whatever reason to the Republican Party. An example of realignment is taking and has been taking place for the last 30 years in the Deep South. States like North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Louisiana, and so on. What that means is, and what's been happening in the Deep South, is folks who were once part of the Democratic Party are shifting over to the Republican Party. And the reason for that is the National Democratic Party has become very, very liberal. And people in the deeper South tend to be very conservative, both fiscally and socially. So they're moving. It's a very hard thing to do for people who've had a family that were Democrats for 1,000 years. Now they're going to shift over to the Republican Party because there's a tendency to think that, in fact, the Republican Party is becoming more conservative. So that's realignment. De-alignment is where people just drop out of a political party, but they don't sign up for another one. They become independent, or they become non-political and don't vote anymore. That's de-alignment. The text talks about party competition and party relevance, and I think if you'll take a look at page 172 and the modal or model structure there, the bimodal structure, I think the underlying point here with competition and relevance is when two parties are very competitive, then when one party takes office, the Republicans, let's say, we're going to find a lot of Republican kinds of policy being made. And let's say 4 years goes by, and the Republicans are taken out of office, and the Democrats come in, then you're going to find a lot of Democratic kinds of policies being made. That means that when there's competition, then policies are relevant to the party in power. However, in some places, whether the Democrats are in office or the Republicans at the state and local level, you find it makes not much difference because the policies being created remain about the same with regard to conservative and how liberal they might be. And if that's the case, if parties change hands, one party comes in, another goes out, and we don't see much change in policy, we would say, well, there's not much policy relevance in that state or local election or that region. Text talks about incumbents. Make sure you know a little bit about that. Who are they? What do they do? An incumbent basically gets name recognition. Rick Santorum ran in the Republican primary and became the second runner behind Mitt Romney, and gained quite many votes toward the primary Republican Party votes, and he was relatively unknown. I mean, Rick Santorum, who knew his name before he ran for office? So he was not. He's not an incumbent with a lot of name recognition. However, he still did well, and Mitt Romney's been around for 100,000 years, and everybody knows the name. May not remember what he runs for, what he stands for, and how he runs, but his name recognition certainly has brought him back to the political arena. So, name recognition, the ability to stand out front of people, have them know who you are, puts people back into office as incumbents, more likely than not. Now, talk a little bit about PACs, political action committees. This is again on somewhere around page 180. PACs can support the candidate, or they can throw dirt on the opponent. They can do either one, dirty tactics or clean tactics. And my preference is that PACs, political action committees, can support the candidate with positive messages, but I think you'll notice with the onset of super PACs, which are sort of untethered, uncontrolled, huge money-making entities that dump tons of money on candidates and on the media, because that's allowed to happen in recent history, these PACs, tend to get behind and support their candidate, and at the same time deliver a lot of negative knockout punches to the opposing candidate. So they're kind of working in both worlds, I guess. All right, then I guess that's it for Chapter 5 in terms of pointing you in a direction. Again, if you have any questions, you can email me. The purpose of these videos is simply to direct your attention. These are not for teaching purposes. You need to go to the text and read the text, particularly in these areas of learning. Thank you.